Hey guys, it's Sarah from Just My Typewriter, and I'm still in the process of whittling down my forever collection. So I started collecting typewriters in 2018, and I very quickly acquired a lot of them. And since then, I've been trying to figure out what I like most in typewriters, what I gravitate toward most as a collector, and as a typewriter user and repair tech, and what I don't. And when I find a typewriter that I don't love as much as the ones I already have, I'm trying to find a way to rehome it, whether that's sending to somebody, giving it to a friend, giving it away, or selling it. So today I thought we'd sit down and talk about my process of selling a typewriter. My criteria for machines that stay in my collections are ones that I have personal connections to, that came from people that are in my family or people that I know, ones that I have like a special story attached to finding, ones that might be rare or interesting, or ones that I just really love to use. I currently have about 26 typewriters in my collection, 4 of which are Barbies, so I don't know if those really count. And I've sold close to 30 typewriters since I started. When I started collecting, I bought every single thing, and I wanted to save all of them because I thought it was the coolest thing ever. And now, 5 years later, I'm trying to hone down into what I really like, and the things that I like I keep, and those that I don't, I'm rehoming. My process of reselling a typewriter starts really with doing that initial test of a machine. Anytime I get a new machine, I go through my cleaning process, which includes testing it, cleaning it, doing any of the repairs. If you're interested in that process, I'll include my Cleaning 101 video down in the description so you can check that out. But I always want a typewriter to be working before I rehome it. I do not like to rehome projects. That's asking somebody a lot to do, and I often sell to first-time buyers, so I don't like to give them something that might be too intimidating when they start, because I've had those projects and I would not have kept collecting if I had started off with one of those really intense projects personally. So I like to get a typewriter working, and that's usually my first stage. I then like to have it for a little while to really get used to using it, to try it out a bit to see if I enjoy it before I go and rehome it. I don't buy typewriters specifically to resell, and I'm not a professional. So I'm buying them for myself. If I don't like them, that's when they go out into the world. So I'll take that typewriter that I've fixed, I'll put it in my collection for a little while, I will film with it, I will write pen pal letters with it, I'll just get used to using it. And that's where I can learn the quirks that might need adjusting, or decide if it's something that just really isn't a fit for me personally. Some of the things that can cause me not to enjoy a typewriter as much as some of the other ones in my collection could be things like key shapes, how the keyboard is set up, how it types or operates, the typeface. If it's just something I don't use normally and I always gravitate towards something else, I find it's a little easier to let it go. Now, I've had trouble getting rid of machines that I have personal connections to. Some of my earliest machines I find are just harder to get rid of because I've had them for so long, so I feel like they're part of my collection despite me not using them very often. But when I keep avoiding using a machine or it sits in its case a lot, it's time for it to go. So I've cleaned it, it's working, I know how it works. I also do a little bit of research on this machine specifically. I find out the date, I check the serial number, I check out the rarity of this machine as well, just so I know what I'm getting into when I'm selling it, and I also do that personally to know what machines are in my collection. And then I move on to the selling process. Now, I've sold typewriters in a lot of different ways, whether that's having people in my life ask for a typewriter and I show up with a couple options, whether that's just sending them one. And the way that I've mostly been selling is through Facebook Marketplace. I don't like to ship typewriters. I find it dangerous. I don't like the risk. I don't want to send somebody something perfect and it show up damaged. I've seen lots of horror stories on the Facebook groups and on Instagram. It's just not worth it to me, and shipping can also add a lot to the cost of a machine, and I am trying to do this affordably for the consumer, so I try to avoid selling machines on websites like eBay and Etsy and Poshmark and anything that would require me to do shipping. So I naturally gravitate towards something like Facebook Marketplace when it comes to selling my machines. When I go to list a machine on Facebook Marketplace, I do have some tips and tricks that make it a little bit easier to make your post stand out. I first start by surveying the landscape. This is really helpful with knowing what kind of machines are out there, what kind of prices are out there, and for me, knowing what kind of photos people put in their Facebook posts. I have found, as someone who buys a lot of typewriters off of Facebook Marketplace, that people aren't great at listing typewriters on Facebook Marketplace when I know I want to use it. They don't always list the condition very well because they can't always assess it very well. They're not professionals, and that's okay. They might not include pictures of everything that I want to see, things like pictures of the the typeface, things like pictures of the bottom or the sides, or if it's damaged, or a case. So I start by doing a little bit of research to see what's out there. This is also really helpful when it comes to setting prices. If you've seen a machine on Facebook Marketplace for a really long time and it's got a high number on it, that'll indicate to you that that price is not working in that market. So you might want to price your machine a little bit lower if you're trying to get it moving. And because I have less and less space, I'm trying to get mine moving quicker. I don't want them to sit around as long. So I tend to price mine lower than the machines in the market around me. So because I make content on the internet, I usually start with the photo process of selling that machine. After I've got it ready to go and I'm ready to list it, I will go through and take photos of this machine. I like to take pictures of the front, including any logoing or badges. I like to take a side view picture, a back view picture. I also like to have a photo that includes a picture of the case. One thing that really bothers me is often people will take pictures of their typewriters, but they won't include the case. And I'm not going to buy a portable typewriter if it doesn't come with a case anymore. I don't want to have to go looking for another case. So I like to include a photo that has everything involved with it, and then I will put those in a carousel in order on Facebook Marketplace. I typically like to start with the wide shot angle of the typewriter with the case so you can see everything that's included, and then I go into more detailed shots as I go through, taking pictures of things like the front and the side view and the back. So I've got my photos ready. I also try to make a really descriptive title, and I always want to include typewriter in the title, because when people are searching on Facebook Marketplace, they're probably just putting in typewriter, not Underwood Golden Touch. So I will put the brand of the typewriter. I'll try to put the model of the typewriter as well as the word typewriter. And I like to include the date of the machine somewhere either in the title or in the description, because that helps people kind of place an era on that machine. So I've got the title, I've got the photos. In the description, I like to describe everything about the machine. I also specifically point out if there's been any maintenance or repair done to it, because that's often a question I ask people and they don't really know how to assess the typewriters if they're not professionals or they don't sell them. So I like to include any work I've done on the machine so you know when you get it that I have fixed it and repaired it. I also like to include that I've put a brand new ribbon on it in the description, because the #1 question I get when people are trying to buy typewriters from me or people are new collectors is, where do I get a typewriter ribbon? And then I'll list it. I'm also in a few local sale groups in my area, so I encourage you actually to join any Facebook groups with local yard sales, estate sales, free sale trade groups that are in your local area, because I will cross-list my posts in those groups as well. So they don't only show up on Facebook Marketplace, but they also show up in those yard sale groups, because that might get you a different audience than just somebody searching typewriter in your local area. Now you do have an option on Facebook Marketplace to also offer shipping. I never select that. I never want to ship a typewriter through Facebook Marketplace, so I only do local pickup. And then I list it everywhere I can. And then I wait for a while. It can take a while for somebody to click on your post. I've found it really varies depending on my area. I've actually had much better luck selling typewriters here in my new area than I had back home when it comes to letting them sit around for a while. I've noticed the best selling time for just about anything, but specifically typewriters, is around Christmas. Between November and December, I have the best time selling typewriters. I try to list multiple typewriters around that time, because that's when people are looking for gifts for Christmas, and a typewriter is always on someone's list somehow. When it comes to spring, people are spring cleaning. They're not necessarily buying. So I've had less luck trying to list typewriters earlier in the spring, but I do pretty well in summer. Another thing I've noticed also is that I've got better times of the year to sell, and the prices can also vary depending on where I am. When I'm selling typewriters closer to home, I list them for about $50, and I usually sell them for closer to $40 once I actually start negotiating. In my new area, I've had a lot of luck selling them at $60, which now inflation has changed things a little bit, but I've had better luck selling them at that price point. In my new area, things are just a little bit more expensive where I'm living now, and so I can put that price tag on them. I still have negotiated with most of the ones I've sold more recently, but that $60 lets me negotiate down to $50, which is what I actually want for a machine. Now, the machines in my collection I usually purchase for $25, but I am putting time and effort into cleaning them, and I'm usually putting on a new ribbon, which is another $8 on top of that cost. So I am still trying to make make a little bit of wiggle room off of those machines. I'm not trying to profit, I'm not paying myself for the servicing of those machines, but I do like to get at least enough off of that machine to make it worthwhile to sell. Otherwise, I might as well give it to somebody. Once I have somebody who's actually interested in the machine and we've negotiated a little bit, they've asked me some questions, and they offer me a price, I will then set a meetup. I prefer meeting earlier in the day or during midday, and I like to go to public locations. I've sold a few typewriters where I've had people come to my parents' house, and I'm just not comfortable with that anymore now where I'm living in a new location. So now I choose public meetup spots. It's also just a little bit safer. I like parking lots where I'm near a building with street lights. So I like gas stations, preferably ones that have a Dunkin' Donuts nearby. I like parking lots of stores that I can get to pretty easily where I'm at least far enough away from my home and I'm in a public place that's also a landmark for the person who's buying the machine. And then I like to get there early, and the way that I set up these meetups is that we'll set a time, I get there early, I let them know when I'm there, and I also let them know what kind of car I'm driving. That way they can look for me in the parking lot and they tell me what kind of car they're driving so I can look for them too and be ready to meet them with their typewriter. So I recently did this process with my Remington Deluxe, which I sold. This was the last typewriter that I actually fixed. It was one that sat in my collection for a while. I didn't love it. I tested it a few times. It just wasn't perfect for me. So I did decide to rehome this machine, and I went through this same process. So this morning I'm going out to sell the Remington. I'm meeting them in a Dunkin' Donuts parking lot, which is my preferred method of pickup. And I wanted to do a quick test of the Remington before I send it out the door, just to make sure it's all ready to go. And I wanted to include some paper so that they can test it in person. So I'm gonna do that really quickly. I am parked in an impossible parking space. So I went in and got coffee, because it's a Dunkin', and now I'm gonna go get gas and then park somewhere else so that I can actually get out of this parking spot. Selling a typewriter will pay for my breakfast and a tank of gas. I do have some other techniques and tactics that I personally like to do before selling a machine. I always like to test it again before I list it and the night before I go out to sell it. I go through the entire keyboard, make sure everything's working again, just because if it's been sitting for a little bit, I want to make sure it's still fully operational. I always try to bring paper with me so that they can test it when they're there. I double check the ribbon. I make sure everything's good to go. And then when they're there, if they've never bought a typewriter before or haven't used one in a while, I do like to go through the process of running through all of the functions of the typewriter and the keyboard. I'm usually selling to first-time buyers. I've actually sold to a few more collectors since moving, but I'm usually selling to people who are buying a typewriter for the first time. And so I like to go through everything that's on the typewriter so that when they get it, they can just start using it. There is no huge learning curve, because I remember when I got my first typewriter, I didn't know how it worked, and it took a lot of clicking buttons to feel comfortable with it. And so if I can help speed up that process for the person buying that machine, that's something that I like to do for them. So I'll run them through how to do that. I'll usually also send them a link to my Typewriter Ribbons 101 video and my Typewriter Using 101 video, just so they have a little bit more context for how to use that machine. So if they have questions, they have a place to go. And that's my traditional selling process. But sometimes you don't always sell the way that you intend to, and sometimes you just randomly run into people who recognize you as the typewriter person or who might want to buy a typewriter. Ignore the fact that my face is peeling in many different areas. I was just in Target buying things that I definitely do not need, and I had my typewriter purse on me, and someone came up to me and complimented my purse and said that they had been looking for a typewriter for forever. And I was like, huh, I can sell one here. So I gave them my phone number, told them about my YouTube channel, and they texted me. And so I'm going to send them a couple photos of the typewriters that I have that I may have not been ready to let go of just yet, but this person was really interested in having a typewriter to use. So it makes me feel a little bit better about some of those that I'm on the fence about. I'm thinking my Remington travel writer might be the right place for, or the right typewriter for this person. So you never know when you're gonna run into somebody in Target and sell a typewriter in the coffee aisle. So that random lady in Target sale didn't really go through, but it's always nice to have a backup for when you are selling typewriters as well. If you don't sell it one way, there's always somebody else who might be interested in a typewriter. So I went ahead and contacted somebody else on Facebook Marketplace who had messaged me about my last Remington typewriter. That's a look. So I messaged the person who originally wanted the typewriter that I met in Target. They didn't get back to me, so I messaged somebody else who said that they wanted a typewriter the last time I sold one. And they said, hey, that's fine. Can I get it next weekend? The next weekend came around, I messaged them, they never responded. So I decided to cut my losses and just go ahead and post the typewriter on Facebook Marketplace. That was on yesterday? That might have been yesterday, which was Monday. Today's a Tuesday. So this morning I was at work doing a radio show because I'm a DJ on the radio in the summers, and I received a message on Facebook Marketplace from somebody interested in purchasing my Remington Travel Ritter. They offered me $35. I said I couldn't do that. I could do $50. I had it listed at $60. They said they would only pay $40. And then I said, well, I'm going to hold out, but I'll let you know if I still have it in a few weeks. And eventually they countered back with, hey, why don't we split it at $45? I scrolled back up and realized that this person is in the Antique Typewriter Collectors group. So that makes me feel a lot better about it, that it's going to a good place. And I completely understand where he's coming from. If he's a collector and he's buying multiple machines, he's going to want it at a price that makes it affordable to him if he's got more. So I said, great, fine, no problem. And he's like, okay, I'll meet you this afternoon. So I'm about to get in my car and go drive to a Pennsylvania welcome station so that I can meet this guy and sell off my Remington Travel Ritter. And I will be out of Remingtons then, which is kind of crazy. So let's go rehome this typewriter. So selling a typewriter can take all kinds of different forms. I found selling more locally works best for me because I like to know where they're going. I try to ask people what they're using that typewriter for before I fully hand it over to them and put it in their car, just to make sure they're not a key chopper. But I'm also making sure that they know what they're getting into, that they know how to use the machine, that they're walking away a happy customer. Because I love these machines. I put a lot of time and effort into making sure that they work and that they're happy. So I don't want them to go to a place where they're not going to be used or the person buying them is confused. I just want to make sure they end up in the right place. I'd like to consider myself the foster mom of typewriters. One other thing that comes up with Facebook Marketplace is that after a certain period of time, if you're not getting any messages or you're not selling the machine, Facebook Marketplace will ask if you want to renew your listing. The older a post gets, the further down the list it goes. So when Facebook Marketplace asks if you want to renew a listing, you have the option to do that, and it'll bring it right back up to the top. It'll relist it as basically a brand new listing. So that gives you the opportunity to get up to the top of the search bar again, and you can do that a few times. I always renew a listing when it's available just so I can get it back up to the beginning of the search terms. If something sits for a while, it might be time to think about the price. Do you want to drop the price a little bit? You can also try raising the price, also an option. Or do you want to reshuffle the pictures or try listing it somewhere else? So if it sits for a while, you have the opportunity to do a little bit of wiggle room and work. Personally, I found that portables sell much better than desktop standards. You have to have the right person to buy a desktop standard. I find portables seem to do better, and I'll usually list desktop standards for a little bit less just because I know that it needs to be a specific person who's looking for that, and I've more often than not sat longer on those listings than I have on portables. I usually don't have luck selling electrics, but since moving I've had a lot more luck selling electric typewriters, but it's usually around the winter time, so in that November, December time. So you can time out when you're selling things, you can mess with your listing a little bit to make it more appealing. You can also try dropping the price or listing it in other locations. I encourage the professionals to leave more tips and tricks down in the comments below. These are just some things that work for me personally when I'm selling a typewriter and I'm trying to whittle down my collection. I'm trying to get down to 25, but I don't know how to get rid of any more. If you're interested in more typewriter content, I do some other videos on this YouTube channel, as well as on Instagram at just.my.typewriter. And thank you all so much for watching, and remind you, you're just my typewriter.